Thank you all for coming tonight. Venerable Robina Courtin has worked full-time for Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche's organization, the Foundation for the Preservation of the Mahayana Tradition, since her ordination in the late 1970s. Over the years, she has served as editorial director of Wisdom Publications, editor of Mandala Magazine, executive director of Liberation Prison Project, and as a touring teacher of Buddhism. Her life and work with prisoners has been featured in the documentary films Chasing Buddha and Key to Freedom. Venerable Robina is known for her straightforward and energetic teaching style, helping people discover the potential of their own minds with clear explanations about Tibetan Buddhism and how to apply it to their lives. Thank you so much for being here.
Sorry, excuse me, forgive me. You're so kind. Here I'm chatting away. So I've got a big picture of me there. That's kind of boring. I want to see the people. That's better. There we go. Hi, people. Hello, everybody. Human beings in person and on Zoom. Forgive me.
Okay. Stage is yours.
Okay, what's our topic tonight? Who?
So grasping, it's
Maybe it's how to realize emptiness so we can get rid of ego grasping. Or the best way to get rid of ego grasping is to realize emptiness. Is that it? Okay, good. Let's look at that. Okay. So just put ourselves on the right track. As the Lamas would say, we set our motivation. As we might say, what's our purpose? Why are we here together? So we just kind of think we're here listening to these words, and that includes me, coming from the Buddha through the minds of all the Rigsin, all the knowledge holders, all the way from the Buddha up to the present. This living lineage of knowledge holders that's very delicious. Buddha's teachings about the universe, reality, happiness, suffering, and the methods of how to stop suffering and get happy. Basically. So yeah, so we're doing this so we can develop, so we can get some advice from it, take some tools away, so we can develop our own marvelous potential, so we can be a benefit to others. Basically, that's it, you know. So as far as the Buddha is concerned, he's found, as far as he's concerned, he's identified what suffering is, articulates it very clearly in the Four Noble Truths, his first teaching, and presents, he's articulating the causes of it and then the solution, because his view is that all minds, all semchens, all sentient beings, all mind possessors, the term in Tibetan semchen is literally mind possessor, all mind possessors, all humans, all animals, all the creatures, and all the other realms of beings in the realms of existence the Buddha would assert exist, but which we perhaps can't see. All semchens possess this natural potential to be free of suffering and to be full of happiness, speaking very simply. But another way of putting it, certainly from the Mahayana Buddhist tradition point of view, perspective, every single person, every single mind possessor has the potential to achieve, to become a Buddha. So the etymology of that word tells us very simply what that means. It's very clear. Bud implies the eradication of all the nonsense in the mind, which happen to be the causes of suffering, because he's found that they're not at the core of our being. And these are called the delusions, the neuroses, all the voices of ego grasping, the one we're going to get to tonight, all its voices, attachment, aversion, all the neuroses that we're very familiar with. As far as Buddha is concerned, he has found that they're not intrinsic to the mind. They're not at the core of our being. They're not oneness with our mind. He has found that they can be we can rid the mind of them. And he's found it in his own mind and done the job and presents us his methodology, basically. But not only can we do that, Buddha implies we can develop to perfection everything else in the mind, which are at the core of our being, in a sense. And these are the positive qualities, the virtues. It's very simple. Buddhist psychology is almost deceptively simple in the way it would describe three categories of states of mind. And the first two are the neurotic, deluded, ridiculous, non-virtuous, negative ones, are the source of suffering and the cause of our pain. and the cause of why we harm others. And then the other ones, the virtuous ones, the good ones, the positive ones. Seems almost, as I said, deceptively simple way of positing them, but this is the Buddhist view, you know. And so if it is true, we can rid our minds of all the rubbish and develop to perfection all the goodness. Well, we better be very clear what he means by that. What is the mind? What is the rubbish and what is the goodness? Identify it, you know. So in other words, we all possess Buddha nature, as it says in the teachings. We all possess the potential, just naturally. It's the nature of mind to be fully developed, to be a Buddha. So, of course, from the materialist point of view, from the neuroscientific point of view, this is a demented idea. I mean, it's like a nuttiest thing we've ever heard. Because straight away we know we're talking about a thing called the brain. I'm not discussing the brain here. That's not Buddha's expertise. His expertise is the actual, you know, the internal, subjective, cognitive process itself, the very process of cognition. That's what he means by mind. And for him, by definition, it's not the brain. The brain, if you like, and the physical parts of us are physical indicators of what's happening in the mind, as far as the Buddha is concerned. So we're discussing that here. Of course, we don't have to believe him. Just presenting what he says. It's up to us to look into it. So in general, then, the job of being a Buddhist, if it's true that we can rid the mind of all the rubbish and develop all the goodness, then obviously the job is to do that. So the methodology, it's implying the methodology. So the essence of being a Buddhist then is that job. All the things we do as Buddhists, you know, like all taking vows and abiding by the laws of karma and having faith in the holy beings and doing this practice and taking an empowerment and doing this and doing that, they're not the main job of a Buddhist. They're the practices that enable us to do the main job of ridding the mind of the rubbish and developing the goodness. That's a way of saying it. So, you know, it depends on, you know, if you're a Tibetan Buddhist and maybe you've got the tradition of the Gelugpas and you talk about the Lamrim, this packaging of Buddhist teachings, you know, if you're Sakya, Kagyu, whatever, there's variations of this in the Tibetan traditions, these packages of Buddha's teachings, all of them presenting the teachings in terms of their being practice, experiential, so therefore presented kind of incrementally, you know. So the very first job of being a Buddhist is to abide by the laws of karma, to abide by good ethics, not kill and not steal and not lie. In other words, another simple way of putting it is to control our body and speech, to discipline our behavior. Why? Because the fundamental view of the Buddha, this law of karma, as far as he's concerned, it's one of the things he's observed as well, this natural law that runs the universe, this law within which our minds run, if you like, is that whatever we think and do and say programs us, so seeds in our mind, produces the person we become. As His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, karma is like self-creation. This is fundamental to the entire Buddhist view. So things we do with our body and speech, and crucially, finally, things that we do with our mind. This is what produces us. So if we want to produce a Buddha, we want to turn ourselves into a Buddha, you know, we follow the steps of the path. We first live in vows, control our body and speech, harness the energy of our behavior, don't kill, don't steal, don't lie. Not because Buddha says. That's not the reason. That's the reason if you're a Christian. That's a crucial point. The reason if you're a Christian to not kill and steal is because God said. For the Buddha, it's just because it causes you suffering, not to mention the suffering you cause others. So then you're ready now, having controlled your body and speech to some degree, living in vows and so on and so forth. And, you know, we're now ready to start to do the real job of looking into the mind, working on the mind. So in the mind, he says, we've got these categories of states of mind, 3 categories, again, deceptively simple. Those that are the neurotic, delusional, disturbing. There are many terms you can use. And we're super familiar with them. Attachment, anger, jealousy, low self-esteem, you know, anxiety, depression. All these dramas we are very familiar with. But the root of them, the root delusion, the root affliction, as they call in the Sanskrit and the Tibetan term, affliction, the root delusion, the root affliction, the root neurotic state of mind, the root mental illness, if you like, is referred to as ignorance, very simply. But it's a very specific ignorance, maripa, unawareness. This is the literally root of all problems, such that when we've realized emptiness, quote unquote, we have uprooted the sources, the causes of suffering. So that's the final job to be done on this path, in order to then combine it with bodhicitta and perfect these two and then become a Buddha. So all the stages of the practice before that prime our body and speech, and crucially our mind, to do this work. The very first stage is control your body and speech. Then to the degree you've got some harnessing of your physical and verbal energy, you've now got the miracle of space to start to work on your mind, the crucial job. So in the first stages, we don't discuss emptiness. We're not discussing this root delusion yet. We're going to discuss the branches, the branch delusions, and this is crucially attachment and all the others. The Four Noble Truths, effectively attachment to the source of our suffering. So that's true, we better understand it. And this is why this model of the mind in Buddhism is deceptively simple. We have to identify all the neurotic states of mind that Buddha says we can get rid of, and distinguish them from the virtuous states of mind, which we can develop to perfection. And this is, in a way, is one way of saying this is the central job of being a Buddhist, to learn to identify these, among these thousands of states of mind in here, these two main categories. Well, there's a third category. In general, one way of seeing these three categories of states of mind is negative, positive, and neutral, which sounds kind of boring, or even non-virtuous, virtuous, and neither. It's an odd way of putting the mind, but this is the Buddhist approach. So it's crucial, it's fundamental. If you want to be a Buddhist, if you can't distinguish these, you're not being a Buddhist. If you can wear nice robes like I'm wearing, 14th century Tibetan robes, and have a bald head and live in my vows, all these things we do. They're being Buddhist, yeah, but they're not the central job. The central job is knowing your mind and changing it, as I said. So we need to understand Buddha's model of the mind, which we often don't study if we're Buddhists. So we know the words attachment, anger, jealousy. We're super familiar. Buddha doesn't own these, but he has a very specific way of identifying and analyzing them, So basically all the negative ones, the neurotic ones, the delusions, the afflictions, they often, we all know, if you've read even one Buddhist book, you're going to guarantee to find this term called the three poisons. Ignorance, attachment, and aversion, variations of those three words. Well, ignorance, the root ignorance, this one we're about to discuss, getting to, is called maripa, unawareness. So it's a primordial ignorance, a primordial misconception in the mind that totally believes in a real, solid, independent, pointable, findable me and everything else. This is the root problem. This is the root mistake. So its main voices, which we have to handle in the earlier stages of our practice, before we get to emptiness, before we begin to identify this root delusion, we need to identify the branch delusion. So that's attachment and aversion among those three poisons and all the others, So these three, as Ling Rinpoche says, in the teachings, it always talks about, Buddha talks about 84,000 neurotic states of mind. And he has 84,000 solutions to the problem. But all those 84,000 can be summarized into these three. And as Ling Rinpoche says, 21,000 are rooted in ignorance, 21,000 are rooted in attachment or have the character of attachment, and 21,000 are rooted in aversion, and the fourth 21,000 have a character of all three. So it's kind of very fascinating kind of way to put it all. All these voices in our head, the neurotic ones, can be divided into these 84 different ones, and they all come down to these three. So these three, there's an intimate relationship between them. If we just think ordinary terms of ignorance, yeah, we know about ignorance, idiot person, ignorant. Attachment, we're not sure what we even mean by that. We think it's a good quality. We use a different definition from the Buddha. And then aversion, we can't get that one, anger. So but there's an intimate relationship between these three and a hierarchical one. I'm beginning to understand these, which is in the middle stages of our practice. This is absolutely vital in order to do the job that Buddha is suggesting we can do, which is to unpack and unravel our mind and to begin to lessen the neuroses and grow the goodness, until eventually, to rid the mind utterly of all the rubbish, all the neuroses. So to know what it is we're trying to do, we have to look at what it is we're trying to identify, So the three poisons, again, maripa. Well, ignorance can be talked about in general as a generalized type of ignorance, the ignorance of cause and effect, the ignorance of this. But the root one, the specific one, the root one is ignorance of finally how the I and everything else exist. It's ignorance of how things exist. So but it's a very specific ignorance, as His Holiness says. It's, ignorance is, if it was regular ignorance, like, I say, if you say to me, what's 1 + 1, Robina? And I'll say, I don't know. That's regular ignorance. And that can be fixed very quickly. You can tell me the answer and I'll memorize it, and now I've got some wisdom. But the problem with the ignorance that we have got, which is why it's mightily hard to even identify it and then to rid the mind of it, is, as His Holiness says, not only do we not know, in this case, how the I does exist and everything else, but we've got a totally delusional misconception about how it does exist. And that's the problem. In other words, it's not only you do not know that 1 + 1 is 2, but you believe 1 + 1 is 4. And you believed it for so long, nothing in the universe will make you change your mind. So that's a difficult ignorance to get rid of, isn't it? The ignorance of not only not knowing reality, but having made up a fantasy about reality. That's what Buddha is saying. That's why this ignorance is so tremendously hard to get rid of. And we grasp at it, we cling to the truth of it, like grim death, I mean, if we had regular ignorance about how things exist, we'd get enlightened in a couple of years, I think, because we're not going to argue with it. But removing the lies from the mind is the problem in order to see the truth, It's like that. That's intense. And so the key function of all the neuroses, all the afflictions, all the delusions, their key job, and this initially is odd to us, their key job is to misconceive reality, misrepresent reality. They embellish, they decorate, they add on top of what is there. As Lama Zopa says, all the delusions decorate on top of what is there, layers upon layers of characteristics that are not there. This is the really precise function that we need to identify, first know intellectually and then identify in our own minds, of all the neuroses. All of them, not just Marikpa. Marikpa misconceives the final way in which the I and everything exists. But the other delusions all misconceive in their own specific way the way things exist. So, for example, attachment, its key job, attachment, all of these neurotic states of mind. Okay, got to go back a bit. So, okay, when you study the Buddhist model of the mind, you study, first of all, the epistemological model, which is the way the mind works, which is utterly fascinating. And we're not discussing the brain, we're discussing the actual cognitive process itself, how it functions. So one way here, which is crucial to understand, is one way here that the mind functions is in two ways. One, we have sensory consciousness and we have mental consciousness. And it's huge, it's powerful, it's a revelation when we can see this one. So sensory consciousness, as we know, spelling it out this way, is that part of our mind, which is again not physical for the Buddha, that functions, for example, through the medium of the eyeball and all the bits and pieces working nicely, in order to have a moment of eye consciousness, a cognition of eye consciousness. So eye consciousness, ear consciousness, we have the 5 sensory consciousnesses, not just the eyeball, not just the eardrum, but they're just the physical, the actual part that does the cognizing in dependence upon the physical bits. That's the mind. So sensory consciousness, word in Buddhism, consciousness and mind are synonymous, okay? So then we have mental consciousness, and that's where all the thoughts and the feelings and the emotions and the unconscious and the subconscious and intuition, instinct, the whole spectrum of our inner being. That's where the workshop is, as Lama Zopa puts it, So it's very powerful to understand the distinction between these two, and we can see how we make a total mess of our lives because we don't. So always the example I use, simple example I always use, okay? If you see me look here and you see me say, that is it's a pretty cup, That's how I say that. So naturally, without any analysis, we would assume Robina's eyes are seeing a pretty cup. Well, no, not possible. The sensory consciousnesses, the 5 of them, in fact, are profoundly limited in their capacity for cognition. Eye consciousness can only cognize 2 things. shape, and color. Ear consciousness can only cognize sound. Each of them is limited profoundly. But as Lama Yeshe says, we make the body the boss. We give incredible power to our senses. And indeed, we have very powerful experiences through our senses, but many of our experiences are not the senses, but we think they are because we're so addicted to our bodies, you know. Then there's our mental consciousness. So if it is not possible for my eye consciousness to cognize, to see a pretty cup, then we have to know which part of my mind is doing that part. Is that cognizing? Well, that's your mental consciousness. So what happens, and I say it this way, that's really true, quicker than Google, out of my mouth, the second my eyes land there, out of my mouth will come a series of thoughts. What a pretty cup. So that's a thought. It's a mental state, not a sensory. It's a thought. It's an opinion. It's a viewpoint, isn't it? So in other words, based upon, because I mean, the Buddha would say everything we ever see and say and touch and taste and smell since beginningless time, by the way, is stored in our mind, is stored in our memory. So, you know, in this life, I've developed a taste for this and that and like this and do that and learned English and know that's white and that's it and that's a handle. And then out the second I see it, all eye consciousness does is see shape and color. And the next billionth of a second, my mental states take over, my concepts take over and have an opinion about it. Now, is this not how we live our lives? So then now we go to the mental consciousness. We have three categories of states of mind. And these are conceptual. There's two ways in which mental consciousness functions. The grosser way, the level we live at, is called conceptuality, which is the tip of the iceberg. And then when we've got single-pointed concentration, shamatha, we can begin to taste the subtler level of our mind, which is called actually, the mental states, is called perception, direct, non-conceptual states of mind. We don't even posit such a level of mind in modern neuroscience. But we live at the grossest level, and it's a level of conceptuality. And surprisingly, that includes all our emotions, you know. So now getting to the point, within those conceptual states of mind, we have these three categories. The negative, neurotic, delusional, decorating, embellishing states of mind, all the voices of ego, rooted in fear, that are known as often disturbing emotions, so the very having of them is painful. But second, and the crucial piece, which is helping us get to maripa, emptiness, is they have this function of being delusional. They are, and because they're conceptions, which sounds like a shock to us to think that anger is rooted in being a conceptual story, but this is exactly the point that Buddhist psychology is saying. Or when we say anger, all we think of is the body shaking, isn't it? When we think of depression, we think of the inert body in bed, unable to move. That's just the physical. And our tragedy in our culture is we don't pay attention to our mind until the body feels it. And then we think the body's so fantastic, you know. Wow, I feel it in my body. That's gross. We need to feel it in our mind. That's why we need concentration. That's why I need meditation, you know. Body's the grossest level, actually. So these three categories of states of mind at the level we function at the level of conceptuality, the neurotic, delusional, disturbing ones that are rooted in the root one called maripa, all the voices of ego. This maripa, we can call it, in ignorance, we can often refer to it as ego grasping. Got the energy of grasping. Grasps the I, utterly primordially, beyond conception, beyond, we can't even begin to even notice it. It's totally at the level of assumption, you know. That there is in here somewhere a real solid, pointable, definite little I that runs the show, you know. Then all the voices of it, the main voice is the next of those three, attachment. This primordial emotional hunger, dissatisfaction, that never thinks I'm enough and never thinks I have enough, always wanting something more, never can be satisfied. This is the main energy, the main consequence of this ego grasping. So attachment is like emotional hunger, always wants something more and is never satisfied. And its key function, it exaggerates the deliciousness of things. Then when it doesn't get what it wants, which is 1,000 times a day, the third of the three manifests, and that's called aversion. Volatile level of it is called anger. Milder levels of it are called depression, irritation, annoyance, upset, frustrated. Subtler levels of it are called depression, despair. So the roots, the misconception of an intrinsic me, which gives rise, which in itself is in the nature of fear, utterly miserable, bereft, separate, lonely, cut off from others, fixed in stone, total nonsense, complete fabrication, made it up. And we've been believing in it for eons, Buddha says. Then attachment to get what that I wants, and then a panic attack when it doesn't. They're the three illusions, and we live in these, and all the others are like branches of these, So these words sound simple enough to us, attachment and aversion, but these are profound in Buddhist psychology. We need to understand them in the Buddha's view, not in them. You can use Freud, whoever you want. I'm not complaining. Here we're putting Buddha, very precise definition. And they're all rooted in being conceptual thoughts. And it's only when we've got some concentration in shamatha meditation that we can develop a subtle level of mind where we can begin to identify these conceptual stories that inform our emotions. So the key job of the neurotic ones is to be disturbing and to be delusional. So ego grasping, ignorance. Okay, so if you've got the chocolate cake there, for example, simple example, got the chocolate cake, So attachment coming from the dissatisfaction here, emotional hunger, I'm missing something, wow, 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 get all excited, wow, cake, then you get obsessed with it and get the cake and there it is. And so then the eye consciousness seeing that shape and color on the plate, but attachment writing this ridiculous story about it that grotesquely exaggerates the deliciousness of that brown triangle, believing it's going to make me happy, fill up the gaping hole, believing it's totally divine, the best cake on the planet, and it will appear that way to us, As Lama Yeshe says, think everything out there appears back to us. And as they say in Buddhist psychology, in the aspect of whatever's in our mind. So attachment's there, which is emotional hunger. I don't have enough. I haven't got enough. I'm never satisfied. And what's missing, and then cake, get all excited. And then it exaggerates. The attachment is the emotional hunger. The attachment is the manipulating. The attachment is the controlling energy. Attachment is possessiveness. Attachment is always wanting something more. But its heart job at the conceptual level is to exaggerate, to embellish the deliciousness of the cake and its role in making me happy. We do this. We all see this. We do this with people. Our beloved puppy, our beloved boyfriend, the cake, whatever it might be. And then, of course, what comes from attachment, because it's brutal, it's totally self-centered, is this demand, this expectation. The cake better do that job, make me happy. Which is why, by the time you've had 4 pieces, you're shocked what's happened. Where's the satisfaction? Now I want to vomit, It didn't fulfill my needs. No wonder we're distressed, So, of course, cakes don't mind if you demand it makes you happy, but people do. Big difference, isn't it? When you fall in love with somebody, totally absurdly exaggerate their divineness. And have this, what comes with it is this massive expectation, which is how come we harm each other so badly, So attachments are they're all lies, they're all misconceptions, they're lies, they're misconceptions, and they're so primordial because we practice them, the Buddha says, for countless eons. We came into this life program with them. You don't learn this from your mother. So they all exaggerate. So attachment exaggerates the deliciousness. What does ignorance exaggerate? Because that's always all there. The ignorance is always there, underpinning the attachment. So what does ignorance exaggerate? That's where it's more subtle. So the attachment exaggerates delicious chocolate cake. Ignorance, the root delusion that's completely underpinning attachment, exaggerates the very ontological status itself of delicious chocolate cake. It's a way more subtle mistake. That's why the first level of practice is control your hand and your body and your speech and keep your hand in your lap and only have one piece. The next level of practice where you get some renunciation is don't believe in the story that attachment is telling you. This is a profound level of practice. And the final one is to realize emptiness. There's no intrinsic delicious cake out there from its own side, cannot be. That's one step at a time, So the key job of all the neuroses is to exaggerate, embellish, fabricate. We read it in the yogis when they talk about this, They exaggerate. But because it's so primordial, it's so automatic, we don't notice it. I mean, we know it in theory. We know very well when you're hungry for cake, it looks divine. And after 4 pieces, it looks disgusting. We know that. We don't join the dots. We don't learn. There's enough in that experience to get us realize emptiness. We don't learn from it. Because if the cake were intrinsically delicious, the more you eat it, the more happy you get. Can you imagine? We know it's not true. Even the best sex on the, being blunt now, I'm sorry, being blunt, the best sex on the planet, if you kept having it, you'd die of disgust and exhaustion. I don't mean have a break and get excited again. I mean continuously, like the cake. So it proves the same thing, you know, although it sounds gross. And these mistakes in the mind are just ancient, primordial. Buddha says, practicing for eons and believing in them. Because it happens so immediately. You know, so one of the major practices with the cake, for example, the very first level when you're trying to control your body and speech. I mean, okay, in the 10 non-virtues, Buddha doesn't say don't eat 5 pieces of cake. He might say don't jump on the person else, someone else's partner, don't kill, don't steal, because they're the heaviest actions that harm sentient beings. So at least refrain from those. But we can kind of get the idea. So the first level of practice is harness the energy of our behavior. Not to say you can be praised as a good girl, but because doing the actions of our body and speech, which are the servants of our mind, are what put the heavy energy negative states, karmic seeds in our mind that produce our future suffering. So we're trying to protect ourselves from suffering. So first level is you control the servants of the mind. You harness your energy to some degree. Now you can start to control the mind itself. So even one of the most powerful levels of practice is when the cake is there, you feel the emotional hunger, you feel the excitement, the anticipation, you can't wait to get it in the mouth. We know that. The incredible practice is don't believe it. So don't believe what? The way it appears. All you got to do is remember the cake yesterday after the 4th piece, how it looked disgusting. But we don't, because we forget all about yesterday, that the very cake that made you want to vomit because you ate too much of it is the same cake that did trigger at the beginning some pleasure, but we forget all about the vomit. Next day, we're hungry again and emotionally hungry and believe, I'm sure the cake will do it for me today. And we get excited and you expect it again. And we've been doing this, Buddha says, for eons, bashing our heads against brick walls, believing in these, as Lama Yeshe puts it, karmic appearances, you know. Things appear to us according to our habits in the mind. Just tiny babies, you know. So to even sit there and just, there you're hungry and delicious and exciting and waiting for the cake, you know, just the cake, forget about Fred. And you stop and you say, because it looks divine. And that's the point about ego. The root delusion causes us to believe that the deliciousness is in the cake itself. We believe it appears that way. We say the cake looks delicious. The cake is like vibrating deliciousness. We'd have, and this is the real point, we don't ever notice for 1 second that deliciousness is a description of made by our mind. Pretty cup is a description made by my mind. Cake especially is a good one because we know after 4 pieces, the description is very different. It looks disgusting. You look at that cake, it's not even that cool yet from still out of the oven, but you've had 4 pieces and you know, it's just revolting. You push it away. So now because aversion has taken over from attachment, aversion is what's left when attachment doesn't get what it wants and is fed up. And now aversion is in the mind and that now is projecting, decorating ugliness onto the cake. Like it does when you're in love with Fred and the next day you discover he's cheating on you. How does he look now? In one day, he looks completely different. He looks like a monster now. We know this, but we never learn. We never join the dots. We don't get the learning. Because we believe when attachment is there, we believe in attachment story, the cake is divine. And now when aversion is there after 4 pieces, now we believe it is ugly. We never think our mind has anything to do with it. This is the worst mistake, Buddha's saying. Our mind says delicious. Our mind says ugly, but we don't realize. Even though intellectually we do, because we're good little Buddhists. But we fall into the trap every time. That's how deep these delusions are. So just to practice saying before you put it in the mouth, don't believe in your karmic appearance, Robina. It's just attachment talking. That is like putting if you want to talk about purification, that's like putting atomic bombs under attachment. When you catch your mind and you stop for a second. All of this is talking about attachment, which is the voice of ego grasping, but it's leading us to understand the root delusion. So let's look at that one. Any questions first? Maybe questions first. If not, it's okay. Anybody on Zoom got a question? No, okay, fine. Yes, sweetheart, yes. Mike, yeah, good idea. Good.
Would you say that these afflictions are primordial?
Yeah, right.
So it's a delusion that they're coming from our parents.
Totally, completely, totally nonsense, Buddha says, a load of rubbish, which is a very shocking thing to hear.
Yeah.
I mean, so this is what we got. Let's just discuss this one, okay? It's not as if our parents don't play a role, but obviously, if we're if we're a Christian or a Muslim, we know that the essence of ourselves, our soul, comes from God, and so that's why we think we're made by God. Nothing wrong, and we know the mother gives us a body and mind. So probably that view is still, if you're a Christian or a Muslim, you still know the mother and father gave you a body. And Buddha would agree they give you a body, but his crucial point is your mind isn't physical. Of course, that's an enormously powerful point when the view that prevails on our planet, neuroscience, says it is. But we have to at least posit the possibility, because this is what Buddha is telling us from the Buddhist literature. That's what their observation is. And that's why if you just look at the Indians, well before the Buddha, those genius Hindus, as His Holiness says, it was these amazing Indians more than 3,000 years ago who were the ones actually who began the investigation to the nature of self. They're the one, not Freud. I always say that 100 years ago we thought it was Freud. No, these Indians, geniuses, more than 3,000 years. Buddha came along after that. He was educated in that system. So they're the ones, if you look into the literature, the body of knowledge, it's all there about this technique that they created called samadhi, this ability to go to subtle levels of mind. It's all there in the literature, subtle levels of mind that don't depend upon the brain. So it's not as if it's a cosmic idea, just a surprise to us, that's all. And the consciousness, and all the Hindus too, they see the view of karma. They've seen it with their own minds. Their observation of all this stuff isn't coming from a microscope on the brain. This stuff is coming from their own internal cognition. So it's a whole new way of seeing it, quite different how we are. So the Buddha's idea and the Hindus, we come into this life, our consciousness is not physical, and due to strong karma with mummy and daddy, I found my way to my mother and father when they hopped into bed. My father, Teddy, and my mother Billy. Actually, her name was Agnes, but they called her Billy because they wanted a boy, I think. Anyway, there they were in bed doing what you do. And then the karma came together, the egg and sperm joined, and that's the condition. And then due to past karma with these two people, my consciousness having died, having left a previous body not more than a few weeks ago, could be less, sitting, biding its time in the intermediate state, the karma ripens and I go like a magnet and leap into that egg and sperm and off I go, So the crucial point in all of the teachings in Buddhism are absolutely based upon this view. The whole of Buddhism actually will collapse into a heap of incoherent nonsense if we can prove that this is not true. All of Buddha's views about karma, about suffering, about becoming a Buddha, about everything are all based upon this assumption, this view from the Buddha's perspective, from the Buddha's observation, that consciousness is a beginningless and endless continuity of mental moments, that is not physical, it is not the handiwork of a creator, it is absolutely not the handiwork of mummy and daddy, which doesn't mean they don't play a role. It's clear they do. I mean, my mother was a classical musician, right? And then she saw her little Bobsy, me, and she saw I had some potential. So she taught me music. So everybody would say, well, obviously Robina got her music from her mother. Well, she didn't. My mother came into this life with a tendency to be good at music, for example, due to her own past practice of it. So did I. And I happened to have the good fortune to be born to a mother who could teach me music. So it's not as if they don't play a role, but they don't give you it. That's the radical difference. And of course, in our culture, if you're a Christian, you come from God. If you're a materialist, you come from mother and father. Of course, we don't care much about the father. We always seem to blame the mother. It was the mother's fault, isn't it? So it's my mother, you know, who gave me music. So she did give me genes. She did give me a brain. She did give me a body. She did give me DNA. She did give me all those physical things are coming from my mother. But I find the simplest way to put it, without insulting neuroscientists and doctors in Western medicine, they are the physical indicators of what's going on in my mind and my karma. So there's a way to put it together. You've got to squeeze your brain a bit to work it out. But it's so opposite what we think, you know. It doesn't contradict. So and the shift in your view of when you take the view of karma, many Buddhists don't even think about it and don't like it and just think it's boring. So what's the point? Who cares, you know? But it's got a massive implication experientially. Because the way we feel as ego, the way ego feels, isn't it? We say it like a joke. I didn't ask to get born. It's not my fault. We feel that. We utterly believe that. This feeling of an innocent victim, it's not being cruel, is deep in the bones of how we all feel when bad things happen. The first instinct is it's not my fault. It shouldn't have happened. It's not happening. Why is it happening? I don't deserve it. They don't deserve it. It's that kind of view is deep inside us. So the view of karma radically changes that if you take it on board. I mean, for me, when I first heard the Buddhist teachings, when I, you know, whatever, that was the one that really blew my mind. I loved that idea. I love the view of karma. For me, I felt that was what I'd been missing all my life. Because it means I'm responsible. It means I'm accountable. It means I am creator of myself, quite literally. I think it's an amazing idea. Yeah, I learned from my mother and father. Yes, the world is interdependent. Things happen out there. But when you understand the view of karma and the mind, this is radical in the way that it informs your way of practicing. You take responsibility. You own the good and the bad. You become much more powerful, much more accountable. And you're therefore able to change. Because if I believe it's my mother's fault, then we demand she changes. What do you mean I should change? It's her fault. We have that view. That's a huge view in Buddhist teachings, you know. But it takes time, of course. It's so opposite to what we think. And we don't have to be taught. We don't have to be taught that we're made by God or our mother. We just feel that someone else's blame. We just kind of feel like this innocent victim. We just feel that way. And that's really the way ego grasping causes us to feel, this separate, bereft, lonely victim. It's always someone else's fault, you know, good and bad stuff. We blame the good things for our happiness and say, we blame the cake for making us happy. It's all the cake's fault. Sort of like, well, it's not my fault. Look at it. It's so delicious. It's demanding I eat it. I can't help it. It's not my fault. That's how we feel. We dump responsibility on everything out there. So yes, interesting point. It takes time, but it's huge. Experientially, as practice, it's huge. Not just, many people feel this karma, well, who cares? Like, what's got to do with the price of fish, you know? Well, everything. So anyway, back to ignorance. This is another question. Let's get back to ignorance, grasping at this. Okay. So in general, we're seeing that all these neuroses, their main function is to exaggerate. And their misconceptions, their delusions, their lies, their afflictions, all these words. Okay. So let's get to the root one now. And this, in terms of the stages of practice, that comes at the end. And actually, in fact, on the Mahayana path, the last two of the 6 perfections are where we start to look into this one. In reality, shamatha, the practice of samadhi, the practice of getting concentration, it's not even a Buddhist teaching. It comes from the Hindus. These genius Indians invented it, the Hindus. But if you want to put it into the Buddhist teachings, it's a Hinayana teaching. The first and second scopes of the Lam-Rim, as we call it in the Gelugpa tradition, are the teachings we share with the Hinayana path. They're the same. Abide by the laws of karma, live in vows, control your body and speech, purify your mind every day. Then you go to the second scope, you get renunciation. But if you're on the Hinayana path, you then get concentration with samadhi, and then you'd realize emptiness, and one life or other, you'd achieve your own nirvana, and then you'd be out of here. You won't come back. So they're both with the last 6 perfections, the 5th and the 6th, concentration and emptiness, are actually not Mahayana teachings, but they're in the structure of the path to enlightenment. They're taught in the final stages of the Mahayana path as the last 2 of the 6 perfections. So the first 4, the practice of generosity, morality, patience and perseverance are practiced by the yogi, by the bodhisattva. Once you've achieved bodhicitta, you go from life to life, bopping along, perfecting those four in relation to sentient beings. And then in your own meditation, you're perfecting the last two, finally the last one. In other words, all the teaching, all the practices culminate in the realization of emptiness. It leads to that. Everything is preparing your mind and your mind to get to that. Let's look at that. So, okay, the really nice way, the Tsongkhapa style, and the really nice way to present the view of emptiness is in the ultimate reality, is in the framework of conventional reality. In other words, the two truths. In other words, the Buddha is saying everything that exists in the universe, and this is a major point, that which exists. Everything that does exist has a conventional way of existing and has a final, deeper way of existing. One is the shorthand for conventional is dependent arising, or interdependence, or dependent relation, or dependent origination, all these terms. That things exist interdependently. More specifically, things exist in dependence upon many, many factors. So Buddha takes three here, mainly three levels of dependent arising. Each of them, the first one, the grossest level, which is the everything exists, the I, take the I. No, before that, everything exists in these three levels, got three levels, not everything, but in general, there are three levels at which things exist interdependently. And these in general, too, are three arguments of the Buddha's, arguing with the prevailing views that he was brought up with, proving. So the very first one, so okay, before we go there, so okay, everything that it does exist exists interdependently, in dependence upon various factors. And then you've got the ultimate or the final or the deeper way that things exist, which is the shorthand of which is called emptiness. So dependent arising and emptiness, the two truths, conventional, ultimate, if you like. Conventional, final, conventional, kind of deeper, subtler way of existing. So in general, when we hear these, we misconceive them and we end up with the two wrong views, the two extreme views. So in general, what Buddha is saying is, as we know, if you're studying emptiness, Buddha talks about the emptiness of the I or the self, and then the emptiness of everything else. Because in the earlier stages of viewpoints, very many viewpoints about emptiness in all the Buddha's teachings. There are some of the viewpoints that see sometimes you have to realize the emptiness of the I, but you don't have to realize the emptiness of phenomena, different things. But here, in the views we're discussing here, are the Prasangika Madhyamika view, the view of that our lamas teach, all of our lamas teach, all in different ways, but these, all things that exist are all empty in the same way. So everything that exists then, the Buddha would say, has a conventional way of existing and has this ultimate way of existing. So let's take the phenomenon then called I. So, we can say there's a computer. This is a major thing we have to first do too, is to establish what exists conventionally. Because the Buddha is telling us we get everything wrong. We first have to establish what does exist conventionally. First establish what does exist conventionally. A microphone, a step, a computer, a table, a cup. And there are very specific ways of doing that. And this is a really crucial first step. So, you give the definition. Excuse me, a bit of water. I'll say, what's that, mummy? My same example every time. She'll say, well, that's called a cup, darling, a mug. And I'll say, what is it? That's a really good question. What we're asking is, well, what does it do? What's its meaning? It's a very powerful question. What is it? What's its meaning? See, she's got to tell me. And a definition has two parts, pretty much. She first will tell me its conventional characteristics. Well, as you can see, she'll say, it's this flat-bottomed clay container. I can see that, but I don't know what it is yet. And this is why the major point, is what does it do? What's its function? What's its meaning? And she'll tell me it holds my tea. Well, don't believe her, just to prove it. So she'll get her, teapot, and she will pour, and we will both see it fits the definition. It holds her tea. But even still, there's other things you do to check up. Don't just believe that either. We've got to first establish in our own world that we live in that there's no other definition of a phenomenon like that that contradicts that. So we're establishing already that which exists conventionally, which is a massive job, because you could say, because of all these delusions, we're not only we don't even know what exists conventionally. I mean, look at all the conspiracy theories in the world. Look at the dramas. I mean, it's like rampant and berserk. People end up believing in anything. You believe it, even if we could just get reality conventionally, the world would be a happy place. But we're not even in touch with reality, even conventionally. So to even establish first conventionally what exists, you define it and prove it, then at least we're on track and we start to communicate. The world would be a happy place. We're all in touch with reality. Conventionally, forget ultimate. Are you communicating with me? Because, we're all living in la-la land. We're all living in delusions. That's a good way of putting it. Or, fantasies, conspiracy theories. Well, attachment's a conspiracy theory. Someone made that cake and it's all its fault. It's making me happy. We're all demented, Anyway, conventional and ultimate. So first we establish that's a cup that functions to hold my tea. Correct. But what we don't notice, like with the cake, that attachment, in this case, let's say attachment, exaggerates the very status, exaggerates the very ontological status of the pretty cup, or the cup even the cup, and sees it as intrinsic and real, existing from its own side. That's the mistake. That's impossibly hard to see. So let's look at the phenomenon called I. There are many phenomena or objects of knowledge or existence, and many terms that refer to that which exists. And one of them is called a person. Well, a person, I, me, mine, maybe not sentient being, a slightly different definition, but never mind, we'll keep it simple now. They're all synonyms. Myself, I, me, person. A dog is a person. A Buddha is a person. A hell being is a person. Hitler is a person. Mr. Trump is a person. They're all terms referring to, broadly a sentient being. A Buddha's not a sentient being, but he's a person. Okay. So that's a type of phenomenon. That's a computer. It's a type of phenomenon, a type of thing that exists. So let's look at the phenomenon called I, the person. So basically Buddha's saying that, that this phenomenon, and the computer as well, has these three ways of existing, and these are arguments prevailing views before of existing as a dependent arising. Well, the very first one is that I is the product of the law of cause and effect. So he means karma here. So we understand cause and effect, but our view of cause and effect of I is mother, father, everybody else, But the view of cause and effect means that whatever exists, a computer and I, came into existence in dependence upon various causes. So the crucial point about karma, that I came into existence mainly in dependence upon causes that I created, really is a powerful way already of counteracting ego grasping. So that's at the very first level, that I exist in dependence upon causes. Already that can start to loosen the grip, because that's arguing with a view that I think in one of those earlier views, there is a real intrinsic self or I or soul or essence. The Greeks call it an essence. The Hindus call it an Atman. The Christians call it a soul that is in fact unchanging, uncaused, permanent, blah, blah. And Buddha would say there's no such, you can't have such a thing. He's not just being argumentative. Such a thing cannot exist. It's just not viable. So that's already a powerful way to loosen the grip of ego grasping by thinking about cause and effect. That there is an I that is the product of cause and effect, but among all those causes, you will not find any I among them, because it's the product of all those causes. And the second one is the delicious one, that if we look at the Lam Rim, it's the one that they get us to try and investigate. And this is the one we're going to discuss now. This is such a level of dependent arising. that we all believe totally 100%. Okay, in general, the positing is that the cup is the product of causes, but it's also existing independence upon causes, the first one, so is I. And second one, the cup and I are existing in dependence upon its parts, its bits and pieces. We say, my cup has a handle, my cup has sides, my cup has clay, and so on and so forth. So let's look at this one. This is where we make big mistakes. So we say, everything that exists depends upon its bits and pieces. So this is where, now let's look into the mistake. Look into the mistake. Because Buddha is saying that we totally believe from the depth of our bones, utterly and completely, that there is in here somewhere, among all the other bits and pieces, all the bones, the pipi, the kaka, the eyelashes, the nose, thousands of parts. Your body is made of thousands of parts, right? And your mind is made of thousands of parts. This moment of anger, that level, this one, jealousy, love, millions of bits and pieces. Everything's made of bits and pieces. This too is an argument against the view that there's an intrinsic a thing that's not made of parts. It's partless. They talk about it partless, no such thing, Buddha says. Can't be. So the mistake is we believe utterly and completely that there is in here somewhere a real, definite, findable, pointable, identifiable thing, piece, well, as my friend Pende says, walking hand in hand with the other pieces that's called I, me. So we say those words, we go, yeah, that's right. Of course there is. What do you mean there isn't? What are you talking about? So it's just so automatic for us. The Buddha says, don't be ridiculous. There isn't one. And not only is there isn't one, you don't need one. So let's look into this. So look at our words. Our words are the ones. The words really throw us, We say, I have a nose. We say that, don't we? I have a nose. Now, without analysis, you look. It's true. There it is. There's a nose here. No problem. No problem. So I'll do a simple example. I always do this one. Very simple, the same. And you'll see quite easily. It's easy. It's easy to see this one. I'll make a statement, okay? And I'll say, I'm holding a cup. And you'll see immediately it's true. If you know the meaning of cup and you know that I is referring to this one person speaking, Robina's holding a cup. So that's two things, isn't it? Would you agree it's two things? And you would know if that were a valid statement, you'd have to point out a Robina, an I, that is separate from the cup. It's very simple, isn't it? And you'd have to point out a cup that's not the same as Robina. In fact, you'd have to point out a cup and a Robina that aren't existing in dependence upon each other. They don't depend upon each other. This is a simple example. They do not depend upon each other for their existence. And in that sense, you can point out two separate independent things. That's real simple math and logic. There's an I from the point of view of the two phenomena. One is called cup and one is called I. Easy to prove. Two things. And they're not dependent. Cup breaks, Robina's still intact. Robina dies, cup is still fine. Does its job to hold tea. Simple example of independent and separate. Now we'll get more nuanced. And I'll say, just like I said, I have a nose. So that's two nouns. It's two nouns there, right? Two, cup and I. Here, same thing, two nouns. And in a sense, we believe it's the same. We just instinctively assume that we're going to find an eye and we're going to find a nose. So we can find the nose. There's the nose. Look, there's the nose. We can point it out. And that nose, if I have another example, if I say I have an ear as well. So ear and nose are, it's a bit like this too. They're independent of each other. Ear does not need a nose. At the simplest level, ear does not need a nose to hear things, to do its job. Nose does not need an ear to help it breathe. So they're independent. If nose breaks off, ear can still listen. If ear is deaf, nose can still breathe, in the simplest sense. So those two are independent and separate in a sense, simple way. But where is the third phenomenon, or the first one I mentioned, that is separate and independent? We believe there is. We never question. We believe there is in here. Because we say it, I, you know. We know that feeling more than nose and ear, I. So if you insult me and say, Robina, I think your nose is so ugly. And I'll say, how dare you insult me? You'll say, Robina, I did not insult you, I insulted your nose. This sounds hilarious to us, but this is logical. And as Lama Zopa says, if you say, if you say, I can't stand your nose, Robina, then the I, if it did exist, a little separate I, independent little separate I in there, it would go, oh, phew, I'm glad she didn't insult me. Poor nose must be feeling very bad. This sounds hilarious to us, but this is logical deduction. So the point is this, Buddha's not saying there is no I. That is patently absurd. What he's saying is the I is a dependent phenomenon. In other words, this dependent arising leads to the subtlest one, that I is merely a label. I is a name we impute upon the parts. You won't find a separate piece called I. I mean, this sounds disappointing to us as well. Oh, that's all I am, a bunch of parts? Thanks a lot, you know. But we do believe there is this little person in there. And that's why we suffer so terribly. Listen to the main player in our head is I. Someone insults your nose and you assume it's the I. So, this is really clear that we exaggerate. You know we do this all the time. Your ex-boyfriend or your boyfriend is mean to you. The whole of him appears ugly, doesn't it? But just as one piece, one time he did one thing wrong. So we identify the whole of all these bits and pieces, as being the product, the objects of the owner. So there's two mistakes we make. One that I'm discussing here is the owner. I, like a little landlord, an owner in there who runs the show. That's the first thing we think the job of the I is, to run the show. But what Buddha's saying is we're exaggerating the status of the I. There is an I. But as Lama Zopa says, it's more subtle than we think. You can't just point out a separate I. So there is an I, but here, using this literal way of talking, the I and the nose, they are different, but you can't separate them. It's more subtle, it's more nuanced. You can't separate them. But when we say a word I or nose, we always want to point it out. So you can point out a phenomenon called Robina and separate from the phenomenon called cut. That's easy. But when it gets to more nuanced level, this one you can't. So there is an I, there is a Robina, but we embellish. This ego grasping embellishes the status of Robina as if she were this little owner in there running the show. So one of the analyses we need to do, one of the meditations, literally, is to search among all the parts to find that I we totally believe is in there. It sounds hilarious to us. This is the meditation. In the Lam Rim, they say you have the 4-point analysis. First, you establish what you think the I is that you're going to look for. Then you have to establish two things. One is that you're going to have to you've got to look for the I that you think is separate from the parts, like the owner. But the other mistake we make is that the I is oneness with the parts. So we have to use much logical analysis in our meditation to argue with these two until eventually one day the penny drops and you realize that I doesn't exist. That I, that independent I, cannot exist. That's the realization of emptiness. And you can't get that until you've got samadhi, So then we have to think, what's the implication of this? Who cares, The implication is we'd suffer less. If not even just understanding intellectually. When you're really grasping at the I, that means feeling masses of attachment and masses of anger and masses of jealousy and masses of low self-esteem. When someone just looks at you wrong, you practically have a mental breakdown. We know that. But as we learn these and start to practice, even just intellectually understanding it and practicing, when someone insults your nose, you don't mind. It's just the nose, you know, the rest of me is okay. You don't mind so much. So we can see how we exaggerate everything, you know, because we're so full of pain. Because we grasp at the whole of me as I. Or we grasp at the sense of an owner I, you know. These are the two mistakes we make. So even intellectually, it's hard to get. And that's why they talk about all the time that you're going to do much analysis. There's different ways of meditating on emptiness. Of course, you can do Mahamudra, which is not analysis. You just sit, you concentrate on the mind, and then you watch like a hawk, like a tiny, subtle, waiting to catch how the eye appears. No analysis, no theory. It's very subtle. But there's other ways you're using logic and analysis to argue with delusions, misconceptions. Because if you have a misconception, you have to argue with it. You can't just bully a person into believing 1 + 1 is 2. If they believe for 42 years it's 1 + 1 is 3. They've got to use logic to argue with it, to get to see reality. Can't force it. Same here, you know. So the implication of all this is you become less grasping, less fearful, less attached, less angry, less jealous, more content, more fulfilled, more joyful, literally, you know. But it seems so abstract to it. Giving up attachment seems kind of manageable, but this one, so subtle. Any questions? Any questions, people?
I have a question.
Oh. Online? Is
Yeah.
there?
Actually, I have 2 questions. My
Talk to me, sweetheart.
my first question is, why is
Who's there? I can't read my glasses.
let me
Ruchi,
also-
talk to me, sweetheart.
why is the Buddha not considered a sentient being?
Is it Shruti talking?
Yes, that is.
Talk to me, sweetheart.
Oh, can you not hear me? Sorry. Why is the Buddha not considered a sentient being?
Loud. Seems a bit loud, no? What? A bit softer. Go. Say it again, darling.
Should I be louder or quieter?
Go.
Why is the Buddha not considered a sentient being?
I can't hear what she said. Why does the Buddha what? Oh, that's a good, interesting point, isn't it? I know, it's just terminology. A sentient being is a term they refer to anybody who's not a Buddha. That's all.
Okay.
It's a term for a deluded person, in other words. So that we're all persons, but deluded persons. There's deluded persons and then there's Buddhas. Well, even now, I mean, even the bodhisattvas aren't. No, they're not deluded yet, but they're not all the way. Anybody who's fully perfected. For some reason, the term sentient being is referring to less than a Buddha. That's all. That's all, Shruti.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, darling.
My
Buddha.
second question
Yeah.
is, how did the Buddha know about his previous lives given that he has no soul or atma?
What's the last part of the question?
You mentioned that we don't have a separate self. And so given that, how did the Buddha know that he was XYZ in his previous lives?
Listen, forget the Buddha. I mean, reincarnation has been proven by all the Indian, the genius Hindus before the Buddha, who developed this brilliant psychological skill called single-pointed concentration. The technique that's known as shamatha, the one that, broadly speaking, that mindfulness is based on, this genius, incredibly sophisticated skill that enables a person to go completely beyond the grosser level of conceptuality and sensory consciousness to access these much more subtle levels of mind that we don't even posit as existing in the neuroscientific model. These levels of mind were discovered by these Indians thousands of years ago. And those levels of mind, because they're not conceptual and not sensory, they are far more powerful, far more capable of cognizing phenomena that are more subtle, such as the past, the future. I mean, clairvoyance is one of the most obvious functions of mind at a subtle level. All this is in the Indian literature well before the Buddha. So you
Yes.
don't self. The self has got nothing to do with it. The job of the mind is to cognize things. So the mind, the eye consciousness cognizes color. The mental consciousness has thoughts and feelings. The subtle level of our consciousness, when you've got samadhi, can cognize vast, incredible, the past, the future, the minds of others. It's incredibly powerful. This is all in the literature, darling, well before the Buddha. You with me?
Okay. Yes. Yes.
I mean, you can just get, if you get single point of concentration, if you work really hard at it, give up sex, drugs and rock and roll and mortgages and dogs and you get the mountains, you will get samadhi, you'll get it, and you will then prove reincarnation because you'll be able to see the past and see the future and see the minds of others. This is really totally in the literature. It's all there. Do you understand?
Yeah, I understand. But my question is like, what moves through different lives? Is that not the self?
Darling, what?
What is the part of me that goes from one life to
Your
another?
consciousness, your mind, sweetheart. Your mind, that's all, it's the mind. Your body disintegrates and turns into caca and dust. Your consciousness at the time of death leaves the body. It goes through these, it's described in great detail in the Vajrayana teachings. Your consciousness goes from the sensory, it stopped breathing by the 4th stage of death. You keep getting more subtle, more subtle, more subtle. You go through these 8 stages, and by the 8th stage, all you are at is the very subtle level of your consciousness, and then you leave the body, and then you take a new rebirth. So the mind is what goes from life to life, your consciousness.
Okay, thank you.
You understand?
Yes.
Okay, sweetie. Yes. So,
She was talking a little bit about the soul and the Atman before, and I think
yeah, she did the self, didn't she? Yes. So then the question was?
well, just how do you differentiate consciousness and soul?
Totally nothing to do with that. Buddha would say there's no such thing as a soul. There's no, he's not being rude or anything. He just says there's no, in general, don't we? If we talk about the Christian view would be body, mind, and usually when we say mind, we just mean the intellectual and the brain, right? Don't we? But the word mind in Buddhism is covering all components of everything that isn't the body, unconscious, subconscious, the subtlest level, the grossest level, your neuroses, your virtue, your goodness, your bliss, all of those are your mind. And so then, but the Christians would say there's a third component called a soul. The Hindus, that's exactly what Buddha's arguing with. We don't need this extra piece, an extra independent self. There is a self, there is an I, but not independent or separate. It's more subtle, is the way to say it. Yeah, I mean, so it's not as if he's saying there's no I.
I don't want to make you talk about this,
What,
but
sweetheart?
just the idea of the soul, it seems like the idea is that it's separate. I mean,
which is the view, isn't it?
but the consciousness isn't separate.
From what?
Well, I mean, I'm just trying to differentiate the two.
Okay. Consciousness in the Buddhist view is your thoughts, feelings, emotions, unconscious, subconscious, instinct, whatever you want to posit. All of that is known as your mind or your consciousness. These words are used synonymously. Eye consciousness, ear consciousness, all of that part. So in the Buddhist view, we've got body and we have mind, and they're separate. They are separate, but inextricably linked. They're dependent upon each other. You've got a grosser level of physicality, and then you have a subtler level of physicality, So they're always mind and body are inextricably, they're separate entities, but they're inextricably linked. Whereas there's no third component that the Christians and the Muslims would say called a soul or a self that's pointable and findable. But self in general is the term to refer to the packaging. That's all really Buddha's saying. That I or self is simply the term we use to refer to the combination of the body and mind, not as if there's a separate piece. So it seems a bit, that's the simplest way to put it.
Thank you.
Do you understand? Okay, good. Thank you. Yes. Someone here. Yes, darling.
Hi, I don't even know if I'm going to make sense, but because
I'm sure you will. No, darling.
so we don't, the I is not an intrinsic real concept.
Separate, pointable, like a finger and an eye.
Yes.
You won't find a piece called I.
I think that my question is, we as consciousness going from one body to another in reincarnation, the question is, when did we lost lost that connection.
Which connection, sweetheart?
With the idea of emptiness.
Why would you assume you've had it in the past and lost it? That's a really good point. Why do you think you've had it before? That's a very interesting point. It's a Christian teaching. I'm not complaining. I'm just saying the Christian view is exactly this, that there's the being called God, the essence who doesn't have a beginning, who doesn't have a cause, is all knowing, all compassionate. Nothing wrong. Buddha also agrees that Buddha's all knowing and all compassionate, but they have a beginning. They were ordinary first. But a God is the start of the universe. God is the beginning of the universe. And then God, out of whatever reason, I never understand why, but never mind. I was a good Catholic, but I never understood why God made me. But God, for his own reasons, made sentient beings, and then we cut ourselves away from God. So they would say that you were perfect once, but the Buddhist view is that's not a possibility. If you were already perfect, already a Buddha, that means you've cut the root of all delusions. So if there's no root, if there's no seed, how could ever imperfection come again? Not possible. Impossible. So we've never been enlightened before. If you had, we've had lots of realizations. The Buddha would say we've had samadhi countless lifetimes, but we've never realized emptiness. We've never cut the root. So we kind of get certain levels of realizations and we fall back again. But until we've cut the root by realizing emptiness, then once you've done that, there's no longer a possibility to ever fall back. But why? It's interesting how we assume we must have been perfect once and then lost it. It's interesting because you just said it. Were you brought up as a Christian? Was that you?
No, I didn't realize.
I think it's just a sort of an assumption that somehow it began. When did suffering begin? When did karma begin? When did I begin? When did the world begin? We always want a first moment. But I remember Dalai Lama, one of his talks to all the scientists, all looking for the first Big Bang. He said, no, the Big Bang. He said, Big Bang, no problem. Just not the first Big Bang, that's all. So the Buddha's view is, and this is nutty, I mean, it sounds the opposite to reality for us, but in fact it's reality for the Buddha. Whatever exists, there's only really two things. Minds, trillions upon trillions upon trillions of mind streams, sentient beings, continuities of consciousness, and then matter. And the matter, as far as they're concerned, this model is still the same. It's made of the four elements, and we all have there's matter and minds. We're intimately connected. There's the external matter as well, and so universes are beginningless and minds are beginningless. Because if you posit cause and effect, by definition, you can't have a first cause. But the Christians have a very big teaching that of course you can have a first cause, and that's their philosophy, that God is the first cause. But by definition of the Buddha, everything is existing according to the law of cause and effect. If you can go back and back and back and point to the first moment, then by definition, you can't say it's cause and effect, because that means it didn't have a cause. So there's nothing that exists that didn't have a previous cause. Conclusion, matter and minds, universes, sentient beings, suffering, happiness are beginningless. As nutty as it sounds to us. But we all have an assumption. There's this first moment, a first thing, a first cause. And Buddha would say that's a misconception.
No, that's very clear. Thank you.
Okay.
I just assume that because we, as not this human vessel that I'm wearing right now.
Tell me, say it again.
Oh, no.
It's a good point. Keep talking, please.
Yeah, no, I guess that it's very clear when you present it that way. Thank you. But I assume, or I think that right now I'm just this human experience. Yeah. And my true self is beginningless. But then also, so that means that always I've been separate from the truth of emptiness.
There's another way of putting it that might be, that is realistic from the Buddhist perspective. As long as your mind has existed, which is since beginning of time, it is never separate from the potential to be perfect. So that's why they say we all possess Buddha nature, which means, okay, we sound weird, we all possess Buddha nature. If you look at an acorn, you know it's a seed that if you put it together with a few conditions, it'll turn into an oak tree, right? So then you could say, and this is the language, that all acorns possess oak tree nature. But an acorn is not an oak tree and never has been an oak tree. But as long as there's been an acorn, it's never separate from the potential to be an oak tree. That's what it means. We all possess Buddha nature. It's not as if we're all been Buddha once and we kind of lost it, or it's sort of hidden inside, we've got to pull it out. We all possess the potential. And the Buddha would say, by definition, what defines minds is finally, this is our true nature, to be fully developed. So the potential is all, and that should be encouraging. It's not that we were it once and lost it.
Okay.
We are separate from it, but the potential is there, and that should give us courage.
Okay.
Do you understand my point?
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
It's just that I thought that maybe thousands of eons ago, I actually knew emptiness, and along the
And
way,
if you did, honey,
I lost it,
then
and now
what's
I'm
the point-
here.
What's the point of learning? So what's the point of learning it again if you're going to lose it again? Don't
no,
waste
I know,
time.
maybe,
Don't wait,
I don't
don't even, pardon?
no, you're right. I'm just like,
It's
it
a
was,
total waste of time. No,
okay.
this is what Buddha's saying. What finally cuts suffering is when we've realized, and we'll talk more about it, we've got time, I think, that there never has been, isn't, and never could be an independent I, an inherent I, an intrinsic I. So when we realize that in the depth of our meditation, then you cut the root, and from then you can't fall back. You've got more work to do, but you can't go back after that. That's how they say it.
Perfect.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, okay, okay. Yes.
So would it be true to say that the mind is subject to causes and conditions, or it's not like partless? I'm trying to differentiate soul from mind. And, you know, because the mind moves from life to life.
That's right.
And when someone says, what's the difference between the soul and the mind? Would
Well,
soul be considered partless, individuated?
No, okay, okay. So I think the word soul, the word spirit, the Greeks called it an essence, the Hindus call it an atman. They're referring to a specific thing in itself, an entity that can be pointed to, that of course comes from a creator. That's the key job. I mean, you don't get a soul from nowhere. If you posit a soul, you're positing a creator. Do you understand my point? So you could argue that the word Buddha uses is indeed the same as the Hindus. He uses the word self. So he's not saying there's no self. All he's saying is that the self that does exist isn't separate self. It's not a separate pointable entity that comes from a creator. That's a nutty idea for the Buddha. So self is merely for the Buddha a term we use to refer to this package. So in other words, the correct word would be, I am the person known as Robina. I am not Robina. I am the person labeled Robina. That's a thing labeled a computer. That's not meant to be splitting hairs. It's a huge point. So he's not saying there's no I. He doesn't use the word soul. He's using the Hindu word, which is Atman. He's not saying there's no self. He's saying there's no independent self, which sounds just like boring words, but there's massive meaning in that. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
So the mind is one of the two. A person is made up of two. You've got body and you've got mind. So I is the self, person is the name we use to refer to those two things. That's all. In a simple way, it's that. Whereas we tend to think there is a thing called an I, there's a thing called a body, and there's a thing called a mind. 3 bits. No, 2 bits. And I is the label you put on them. It sounds simple, but that's the way of putting it. And what he's saying is the consequence of believing there's a separate I is suffering. Separate I mean, when you realize emptiness, they say you've no longer got a separate sense of self. You're oneness with everybody else. You're in bliss, you're happy, you're virtuous, you're joyful. Because the believing in a separate I also means separate from others. That's why we have dramas and suffering and wars and craziness, you know. When you've realized emptiness and when you've got even having just bodhicitta, this incredible compassion, even without realizing emptiness, already there's a powerful sense of connectedness with others. And we can see the more we all talk about ego, the person's got very strong ego, meaning very strong self-pity, very strong anger, very strong depression. They really believe there's poor me and the whole universe separate out there, you know? So we feel that way. So as we lessen the grip of ego grasping and lessen the grip of attachment, you get closer to others. There's lesser division between you and others. We can see that, you know? So that believing in this separate I brings attachment and aversion and jealousy and depression and craziness. You know? So cutting the belief in that I, because it never exists in the first place, brings joy and happiness and liberation. That's how they talk. Do you understand? Totally separate. No, darling. Mind, no. Self is another word for I. Okay, let's look at this. So what are the parts of I? What's your name? Who? Who? I'm half deaf over here. I've got to go to the audiologist tomorrow. Finally get some bloody hearing aids. I'm as deaf as a post. Thanks. I've got it finally. Carl. Okay. Carl, as we say in Australia. So listen, honey, Carl is a name for this person. You agree? So Carl, in this case, is another word for person, is another word for I, is another word for self. They're all synonymous. In this case, it's a Carl I. You understand? So what are the parts that make up Carl? Two bits, body and mind. You agree? Use this term. So body and mind are the parts of Carl. So then you're telling me that there's a possibility that Carl or I is the same as the mind. You with me? You just said that, didn't you? You just said it. They're synonymous, you said. Well, I'm suggesting they can't be. Because if your I and your mind were the same, why would you say I have a mind? If I and mind were truly synonymous, they'd be absolutely the same entity, and you wouldn't separate them. You couldn't possibly separate them. So what I'm getting at is the two main mistakes we make. One is we think I is a separate bit that is the owner of the body and mind. And the other one is the belief that all of me is the I. And we have to argue with both of those misconceptions. Because, do you understand me? And it's the same with a cup. I mean, it's easy. Look at the cup. We say, my cup has a base. My cup, or forget the cup has a base. The cup has a handle. And it's true without analysis, you'd right. But we say cup, handle, and base, don't we? That's three things, three words. Well, there's the handle, that's one. There's the base, that's another. Where's the cup? If you take the handle away and the base away, where the hell is the cup? You won't find it. Same here. So this is where in the teachings they talk about we have to do this analysis of looking for this piece called I. But another better way to do it, Buddha would have liked it, is you go to IKEA. You look up IKEA and you find this really nice product called Carl, and you decide you're going to buy one. And you go and they give you a bloody box full of bits, don't they? You've got to construct your own damn Carl. So it's like this, you know. And this is a really important point. So cup is, you know, you've got to search. The Buddha's saying we believe there's some kind of intrinsic cupness here. It's like the I, and we believe it. So it's not too difficult. Take away the handle, take away the base, take away the sides. You don't have a cup because you only got parts, and cup is the label we use to refer to the parts. Well, it's easy with the cup, but how we feel about the I. So what you're doing is you're going to get the box, and they've made a Carl already and then deconstruct it and put them in the box. So they know how many bits you need. They don't give you 5 legs and 7 noses. They know exactly how many bits Carl needs. And you gradually start building the Carl. But you're kind of panicking because you keep waiting for the special little piece called I in its own little Ziploc bag with gold writing on it, such that you think there won't be a proper Carl until there's an I in there that runs the show, because we all believe it's the boss. But you don't need one because the parts do fine functioning as Carl. So there's the same with the creator, same principle. Philosophically, it's the same misconception for the Buddha, that we posit an inherent, intrinsic, separate entity called creator that runs the show. We create a sense of a self that runs the show. They're both the same philosophical position and both mistaken, Buddha says. We don't need creating. All the individual sentient beings on the planet do fine creating their own mess and can hopefully find creating their own happiness. We don't need a boss. We don't need a creator. We don't need a punisher. We don't need a rewarder. That's the dualistic view we all believe. And that's why we have, I'm bad, I'm good, I'm this. It's all fantasy. We exaggerate everything. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay. It's like conspiracy theory, you know. Because we all think that someone's behind everything. That's what do you think? The Trump people all believe everything's behind everything. No matter what happens, there's somebody behind it all, running it, you know. That's how people think about the government. People are paranoid. The government's following me and the government's looking at my camera and all these things. We're totally paranoid. That's the view of ego grasping that exaggerates everything. Are you with me, people? You communicating? We don't need punishing. We don't need rewarding. We don't need creating. We do it ourselves, you know, the mind and the body together, or the mind really. What else, people? Is that enough for tonight? Have I gone over time? I think I have enough. What's the time, by the way? Huh? 8. Okay, so tell me the question. Who is it? Who's talking to me? Hello, Joey. What's your question, darling?
Hello, Venerable. I was wondering if I have found my way to Buddhism in my 50s and I'm loving it and just grabbing a hold of it. Is it safe to say that I have studied Buddhism in my last life or
Of course, darling, there's no question. I mean, if you come into this life being a pedophile, it's because you've done it before. If you come
Okay.
into this life wanting to be a nice person, it's because you've done it before. So yeah, the answer is simply yes.
Okay, thank
Goes
you.
without saying, logical.
Thank you.
Can you see? So luckily you're not a pedophile, Joey. Well done.
I can. Thank you.
Okay, darling.
All right. I'm not a pedophile, I promise.
Okay, you can leave us alone. Who else is there? Anyone? Yes, sweetheart. Go. Yeah.
Hi, just trying to nail the logic down of the
Good, 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 darling.
conversation before. So this mind is never separate from our potential, our Buddha nature.
Well, our medicines put it, our potential to be perfected, our potential to be free of all delusions and full of all goodness, which are qualities of the mind,
Mhm.
are always there. So as long as you have an acorn, by definition, it always possesses it's what defines it, isn't it? It's what defines an acorn is its potential to be an oak tree. You could use it as food. You could, a squirrel would use it as breakfast. You could use it as as jewelry. But what defines it in its bones is its potential to be an acorn. That's Buddha's view of what a mind is. Its potential to be perfected, a Buddha.
So that potentiality, and yet we have had this ignorance that we've had since beginningless time.
Yeah, but ignorance is also beginning. Of course, if it's there now, it's beginning.
Mhm.
It can't have started.
So it's not to say that we've had enlightenment and then lost it.
No, that's right.
And yet it's also not to say that our ignorance or our imperfections are intrinsic to us.
No, that's
either.
exactly the point that he's making. That's the point. And I think even in the simplest sense, that's a demented idea. If you go to a neuroscientist, say, would you give me methods to get rid of all anger, all ego, all fears, you'd have no brain left because we assume even just without knowing neuroscience or even psychology, we just assume that anger and love and compassion and jealousy are normal components of a normal person.
Mhm.
But the Buddha's being much more radical. All the neuroses are there and they cause all the suffering, but they are not at the core of our being. And of course, you've got to study it to see the logic of that. It's not evident because they're all misconceptions and they can be removed from the mind. That's what he's saying.
So we're not separate from this potential of the Buddha nature and also not separate from our ignorance. And this is
Yeah, but
why
don't get those two
there's-
confused. That's not the point.
Hmm.
That's not, I hear you're saying, but it's not the point. If you say there's an acorn, you know that if you don't know it's an oak tree, then, you're in trouble. But as long as you know it can become a potential oak tree, it's always there. As long as you've got an acorn, it can be a potential oak tree. But as long as your point is, as long as the acorn doesn't get the right conditions, it'll always be not separate from his not being an oak tree. True. But that's, who cares? The real point is it's got the potential. So you better find the causes to turn it into an oak tree. So we've got to find the causes to develop our mind into the perfect mind of a Buddha.
And finding those causes, we would say that that's virtuous karma or the building.
Well, I mean, that's, if you want to get a tree, you go to a gardener. If you want to become a Buddha, you go to a person who knows Buddhism. I mean, Buddha's a deal. It's not Christian. This is not Christian view. There's so many similarities. You go to a person who's asserting this,
Mhm.
and that's called a Buddha, a Buddhist teaching. So you better find a person who has that methodology. Do you understand?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. What else? Yes, the gentleman in the pink shirt. Okay.
Hi. So let's say you work really hard on improving yourself, right? Let's say you work really hard to improve yourself,
Pretty much watch yourself.
improve yourself.
Okay, improving you.
Okay. And you die.
That's right.
And
It'll happen.
it certainly will. And you enter another body.
That's right.
Do you start from scratch again or
Do you do what?
do you start from scratch
Oh,
again?
God almighty, no. Oh my God, if you do that, then you might as well give up now, don't even bother. Oh, hell no. Come on, no. I mean, it's like, no, well, if you think about it, look at children. I mean, okay, regular children, we think, oh, it comes from mum, but if you think of it this way, I mean, I was looking on YouTube one time, a couple of years ago, this little Russian boy who plays Bach. He's like 3 years old. I mean, you can't believe what you're seeing. Like somebody's Photoshopped YouTube. You can't believe your eyes, this little child. I remember playing his music. He was 3 or 4 at the time, playing Chopin or Bach or somebody. And I played it to a friend of mine who's a composer over the phone, and he heard a sophisticated adult playing music. He's 3, for God Almighty's sake. I mean, where do you think that comes from? Having done it before. If we lost everything and then came into this life fresh, there'd be nothing there. No instinct, no mind, no tendencies, nothing. We are the product of what we've done before. Not all of the things. We've done a million things before, but certain karma ripens at the time of death that triggers certain seeds to ripen, and then we get a human body or a dog body or whatever, you know. So we bring whatever we are, in the same way that whatever you are today can only have come from yesterday. So whatever we are at the first moment of conception can only have come from a previous life. There's nowhere else, the Buddha's view. Doesn't come from a creator, doesn't come from mummy and daddy, isn't physical, and can't come from nothing. That's the idea. I haven't got to think about it. I mean, Buddha might be wrong. Do you understand? This is the views, this is the logic. What else? Anything else? What do tonight for emptiness? So there is a self, there is an I, but just we exaggerate. As Lama Yeshe puts it, the two truths, we didn't talk nearly enough. There's so much more to talk about. Let's do it again. But as Lama Yeshe says, because what happens now, I'll just finish with this. What happens now when we hear that from the side of the I, you will not find anything at all that is an independent I, which means it is therefore empty of existing from its own side. So when we hear that, we throw the baby out with the bathwater, or as Tsongkhapa says, we fall into the abyss of the great mistake and go, oh, well, there's no I, might as well die. So we go to the extreme view of nothingness, nihilism, total exaggeration. And then we hear, well, you know, dependent arising, there is an I after all. We go, oh, phew, thank God, grasp. So here we over-exaggerate our status, and there's emptiness, we under-exaggerate. So the reality is, and we haven't had time to talk about this, these two truths infer each other. So when you say there is an I that does exist in dependence upon causes, parts, etc., that tells us, therefore, there is no I from its own side. And every time you hear that there is no I from its own side, no I that's independent, that tells you that there is a dependent arising I. So there is an I and there isn't an I, and these two come together, basically. So the two truths come together. The dependent arising proves emptiness, and emptiness proves dependent arising. That's when Nagarjuna says we're on the right track. We think that too. So it's just, yeah, one step at a time. But it's all totally experiential. It's not just intellectual. We can easily get caught up in the intellectual of it, and we're very clever in the West. We really like it and get very arrogant and silly. But it's utterly experiential. It's got to be experiential. You've got to get the taste of it. And the implication of it is joy and happiness and fulfillment and giving up suffering. I mean, who doesn't want that, you know? It's one step at a time. So one very simple way is Holiness Dalai Lama said, I'll finish with this. Someone said, how do you apply emptiness in daily life? He said, oh, it's easy. You simply see something from another point of view, and this is dependent arising. You see, the key, the final, the subtlest way that things exist interdependently is they exist in dependence upon the mind calling it that. I mean, I think we can prove that, you know. I mean, Buddha gives all these examples. I mean, the teachers give examples. When you first see on the blackboard, or now whiteboards maybe, or even your iPad, 1 + 1 is, just the letter A. Your teacher says, and you've never heard it before, she says, that is A. And you learn it. You learn it. So first, you didn't know it was A. You saw just 3 lines. I mean, just 3 lines there. There was no A there. But as soon as you learn it, you realize that you just labeled it A, but then soon enough, you'll forget that you just labeled it A because you now think it is A from its own side, not depending on your mind. That's the mistake. We label everything, Buddha says. We make everything up. But then we forget. And then we think it exists in, we created a cup. And we forget that we forget. We forget. We think it comes from the side of the cup, you know. We label the cake delicious. We forget. We think the delicious is in the cake. No, our mind is continually labeling things and we believe the label. And then we forget that we created it. So there was a simple way to apply emptiness, because if you got grasping, and I'm fighting with my boyfriend, I'm fighting with Carl, let's say, and we know what ego's like. I am right, you are wrong, and I absolutely believe with absolute certainty, don't I, that my view is right. Look at the fundamentalists. Look at all the extreme fundamentalist, you know, anybody, but look at, you know, especially the conspiracy theorists. It is the reality. This is how it is, and nothing in the universe will make them see it differently. Well, that's fixedness, that's ignorance, that's the job of Maripa, to see things as absolute, concrete, set in stone. That's real ignorance. So if I'm just trying to work things out with Carl, and Dalai Lama says, well, apply emptiness by seeing it from another point of view. I mean, even something simple as, you know, a cup. There's a cup with a handle on the right. It was an ugly cup, I'll say, but you know, I turn it around, I'll go there, oh, that's nice, and now that's nice that way. I just saw it from another point of view. That's reality. That's how you become sane. That's how you get along with people. That's how you become happy. Because ignorance causes suffering. Absolute, concrete, set in stone. It is this. And Buddha says there's more to it than that. See it from another point of view. It's profound, you know. Sort of, we can see it. So I always quote my friends in prison, living in these garbage dumps, you know, especially those who've been called innocent, living in these garbage dumps. The ones I know who are really practicing, they learn to see prison in from a different perspective. Instead of ugly, hopeless, not fair, poor me, they learn to see it differently, so they become happy. Everything's like that. Everything's like that. We can see it. This is a simple example of applying dependent arising. Seeing things differently, loosening the grip of this ignorance that clings to things as absolute, you know. So we give it a try. See, it'll bring more results, happiness in the mind. That'll do. Chang chub sem chog rinpoche ma ke panam ke gyuchi ke panyam pa me payang gong ne gondu habasho gewadi nyuda dag lama sangye drup gyone Drowa chikyang malupa de sala gopasho. All right, people. Thank you, sweethearts, for kind. Thank you, everybody on Zoom. Thank you.